Spartanburg to lead 10-6 there in the fourth quarter. Entering the fourth quarter, this was a game that Dutch Fork was leading 6-3. So Spartanburg just absolutely pretty much dominated the entire fourth quarter. Managed to find a way to come out and win this one. Again, final score was 17-6. So hats off to Mark Hodge. Hats off to the Vikings. They did something that they've been looking to do for a very long time, and it happened. So big win for Spartanburg and really good for the upstate. Sure, we're not going to try to spread that credit out among every team up here in the upstate that's lost to Dutch Fork in the last 3 years. That would take away from what Spartanburg did. But in general, it shows that some teams in the upstate can and will hang with the big boys. So congratulations again to the Spartanburg Vikings. That was just a big one for them. Other big games last night, you may have heard about this one, a big upset that happened in Inman. The Chapman Panthers go down 14-0 early to the Burns Rebels, hosting them there in Inman. They go down 14-0 early, and then after the first quarter, they shut that Burns offense out. I mean, Burns still had their chances driving it down the field, but Chapman's defense is absolutely phenomenal there. As they had a big interception from Sean Cunningham that basically sealed the game late. You had another one from Bennett Smith that killed a big Burns drive that was going on. Burns fumbled the ball twice there in the fourth quarter that kind of stalled out a couple of drives. But Burns jumps out to a 14-0 lead. The only points that Chapman could muster on them for a while was a field goal, so it was like 14-3 going into the fourth quarter. And then Chapman outscores them the rest of the way. But Chapman also, again, their defense absolutely held Burns down, and that's difficult to do with the talent that they've got out there, particularly that running back, Trey Segarra. Yeah, he showed a lot of speed and a lot of athleticism last week. Says that he's going to be just about as good as Jalen McGill, really, honestly. And I think Trey Segarra is only a freshman this year, if I'm not mistaken. If I am, then somebody please correct me on that. But yeah, he looks like he's going to be a force to be reckoned with for Burns for a while as well. So to be able to contain him and shut Burns down for 3 full quarters while keeping your offense in the game, that's big for Chapman. I said after the Jamboree at Gaffney that even though they were playing a bad team, Chapman's defense looked like they could keep them in games with their offense ever struggled a little bit, and that happened in this situation. Their offense struggled, their defense kept them in it, and then when it mattered the most, their offense took advantage of what their defense gave them late to come back with the win. But stats in this one, Coleman Gray was 11 for 33 with 208 yards. He ran for 11 times for 43 yards with a touchdown. Matthias Scott, 11 carries for 41 yards and 1 reception for 1 yard. Keanu Na, 11 carries for 50 yards, 1 touchdown. Sean Cunningham also ran the ball once for 2 yards. He had 7 receptions for 162 yards. Bennett Smith, a reception for 15 yards. So both Sean Cunningham and Bennett Smith had an interception and at least 1 reception. Of course, Sean had 6 more receptions, but still, we'll give Bennett that. Max Carter, 1 reception for 26 yards, and Josiah Moore, 1 reception for 4 yards. So Chapman's offense, not the most impressive of numbers this week, but when you're going up against a defense as nasty as Burns, that's going to happen. Question for the Rebels is, what happens from here? It doesn't get any easier for them, as their next game is going to be against Greenville next week. Chapman will go down the road into the friendliest rivalry in sports, as they'll go take on their neighbor, Boiling Springs, at Bulldog Stadium next Friday night. And that one should be pretty interesting because Boiling Springs did something last night against Malden that they haven't done to a team in almost 3 years. They shut out an opponent. Their last shutout victory was like a 63-0 win over Fort Mill back in October of 2020. Boiling Springs goes and lays a beatdown on Malden last night, 55-0. It was the first shutout for Boiling Springs with Rashad Graham as their defensive coordinator, so big congratulations to him. And their first shutout win with Matt Reel as the head coach. So just one of those firsts last night that I was talking about earlier. Boiling Springs gets a big shutout, especially after a disappointing loss like they had where they outplayed T.L. Hanna last week and let it get away from them late. I think Boiling Springs will take this one every single day. Yes, Malden is under a new coaching regime. Malden's got some younger talent on their team. So yes, in a way, you could try to discredit that and say, oh, well, it was the opponent. Doesn't matter. Boiling Springs hasn't done this to an opponent in 3 years. They haven't shut anybody out in 3 years. They haven't dominated anybody like this in 3 years. This was a huge step forward for Boiling Springs. And if you're using, as a measure of success for the season, if you're using continued signs of progress, heck, it can have no better signs of progress than this. Look at their offensive numbers here. Gonna have to pull them up. Give me just a second. It's not on my computer. Yeah, great radio. Lincoln Husky, anyway, did have a big night last night. That's what I'm working my way towards. I'm just trying to find where I had the actual stat screenshot. Here we go. Lincoln Husky, 18 of 23, 345 yards, 5 touchdowns. One heck of a stat line right there for a quarterback that's really, honestly, still kind of figuring things out. I mean, he's developed a lot. There's no question to that. Anthony could attest to as much last week. I could attest to as much from having seen him after their spring practices. He's matured, he's growing, and he's looking a lot better. On top of that, he's got the benefit of having an offensive line with a lot more experience and a lot more size under their belt this year. They did a good job from square one of making sure he looked comfortable last night, and it worked to a T as Boiling Springs just goes out there and lays the domination on Malden. So you can look for no better sign of improvement than just seeing Boiling Springs absolutely just lay a beating on somebody and shut them down. Now, yes, they're going to get a huge litmus test for where they really stand this week when they take on Chapman, and I think we're all looking forward to seeing how that goes. If they can at least compete with them rather than getting blown out by Chapman, you could probably consider that a win. If they beat Chapman, you can consider that a heck of a win. So we'll see how it goes this coming Friday night. It'll be an interesting one at Bulldog Stadium. Another one of the first in the area this week, you had the Dorman Cavaliers picking up their first win under new head coach Jake Morris. Jake Morris, obviously, again, is a Dorman alum. Led them to the state championship in 2009, where they beat Burns for that state championship, if I'm not mistaken. And then went on to play his college ball at North Greenville, returned and came back as an assistant under Dave Gutschall, who he played for. And now he's basically been on staff at Dorman ever since. And now he's got the chance to be the head coach there. And he got his first win as the head coach at his alma mater. So congratulations to Jake Morris, as Dorman got a big 34-13 win last night over North Augusta at home. Dorman quarterback David Sorensen had a pretty good night, looked pretty impressive all night long. He was 7 of 11 for 125 yards with a touchdown, his longest pass being 60 yards. And that was the first touchdown pass he threw to K.D. Hainsworth. K.D. Hainsworth led the receiving attack for Dorman last night. He had 3 receptions for 78 yards and the touchdown. Keenan Arcega-Whiteside had 3 receptions for 43 yards in the win last night. Dorman's rushing attack also pretty solid, as they had 4 different rushers in double figures. TJ Gassaway led the way with 69 yards on 11 touches. David Sorensen himself had 44 yards on 13 attempts. Jarvis Pearson had 23 yards on 4 attempts, and then Riley Scruggs had 21 yards on 2 attempts for Dorman. All in all, Dorman's rushing yard totals, looking through the stats here, they had 41 attempts for 172 yards, and then they had 125 passing yards. So total offense, they had 53 plays for 297 yards last night. So Dorman was the polar opposite of what they were last week. Dorman got off to that slow start against Greenville last week, managed to storm back furiously, and then kind of let it get away as Mazio Bennett scored a couple of touchdowns late on him to put it away. Not the most ideal start for Dorman, because at one point in that game they were down 28-6. Managed to come all the way back, make a game of it, but still let it get away late as they lost by a couple of scores. And in this instance, wasn't the case. Dorman was the first one to score in this one. They scored with 4:15 to play in the first quarter. And that was on the 60-yard touchdown pass to Hainsworth. And they went up 14-0 early in the second quarter. Traded blows at North Augusta up to the half, but they were up 21-13 at the half. And then it was all Dorman the rest of the way, as they scored two more touchdowns there in the fourth quarter to put it away for that 34-13 win.